What I'm about to reveal will shatter everything you thought you knew about human nature. Carl Jung, the legendary psychologist who mapped the darkest corners of the human psyche, discovered something so disturbing about certain individuals that it kept him awake at night. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why he called them vessels of the collective shadow, and why you need to recognize them before it's too late. But first, let me ask you something that might save your life. Have you ever met someone who made you question your own sanity? Someone whose very presence felt like stepping into a psychological minefield? If so, keep listening, because what you experienced wasn't random. It was calculated. Carl Jung said something that most people dismiss as metaphor, but I'm here to tell you its literal truth. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. But Jung discovered that some individuals don't just have a shadow, they become it entirely. They surrender so completely to what he called the dark side of human nature that they cease to be human in any meaningful sense. According to Carl Jung's extensive research into the human psyche, there comes a point where certain narcissists cross what he termed the moral event horizon, a psychological point of no return, where conscience dies and something else takes control. And here's what will terrify you. Jung identified 3 unmistakable signs that this transformation has occurred. But before I reveal these signs, you need to understand something crucial. If you recognize even one of these signs in someone close to you, a partner, family member, boss, or friend, your psychological survival may depend on what you do next. Because Jung warned that these individuals don't just hurt people randomly. They target those who trust the most. They feed on the very relationships that normal humans cherish. So pay attention to every word, because your emotional life, maybe even your physical safety, could depend on recognizing what Jung called the malevolent personality. The first sign, the pleasure principle of destruction. Carl Jung discovered that healthy individuals experience what he called moral anxiety when they cause harm to others. It's an internal alarm system that prevents us from becoming monsters. But Jung documented cases where this system doesn't just malfunction, it reverses entirely. Here's what Jung observed that will chill you to the bone. When a narcissist fully embraces their shadow, they don't just lack empathy, they experience what Jung termed malevolent pleasure. They literally get a dopamine hit from causing psychological pain. Watch this carefully, because your life may depend on it. Notice their facial expressions the next time they hurt someone. Do they look guilty, conflicted, or do you see what Jung called the gleam of the predator, a subtle but unmistakable satisfaction in their eyes? Jung said, the shadow personifies everything that the subject refuses to acknowledge about himself, but in these cases, the shadow has won. They're no longer refusing to acknowledge their darkness, they're celebrating it. But here's where it gets truly terrifying, and why Jung spent years studying this phenomenon. It escalates. What starts as subtle emotional manipulation becomes what Jung called psychological vampirism, a systematic draining of their victim's life force. According to Carl Jung's case studies, these individuals don't just hurt strangers. They reserve their cruelest treatment for those closest to them. Why? Because Jung discovered that intimacy equals vulnerability, and vulnerability equals power in their twisted psychology. If you're thinking, but they seem so caring at first, you're experiencing what Jung termed the seductive shadow, the ability of these individuals to mirror exactly what you need to see until you're completely invested. Then the mask comes off. The second sign, reality distortion field. Carl Jung wrote extensively about what he called psychological projection, the tendency to see in others what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. But Jung discovered that malevolent narcissists take this to a supernatural level. They don't just project, they literally rewrite reality in real time. Here's what Jung found most disturbing. They believe their own lies so completely that they can pass any lie detector test. Why? Because in their minds, Truth is whatever serves their purposes at any given moment. Jung called this flexible reality syndrome. You could show them video evidence, written proof, witness testimony. It doesn't matter. They will look you dead in the eyes and tell you that you're the one who's confused, delusional, or lying. And they'll say it with such conviction that you'll start to doubt yourself. Jung discovered something that explains why their gaslighting is so effective. They don't just change the facts, they change the emotional context around the facts. They make you feel crazy for trusting your own memory, your own eyes, your own experience. According to Carl Jung's research, this isn't just manipulation, it's what he called psychic murder. They're not just lying to you, they're systematically destroying your ability to trust your own perception of reality. And here's the most chilling part. Jung found that the more intelligent the narcissist, the more sophisticated their reality distortion becomes. They don't just gaslight, they create entire alternative universes where they're always the victim, always the hero, always right. The third sign, the death of conscience. Carl Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But what he discovered about malevolent narcissists is even more terrifying. They accept themselves completely because they have no conscience left to accept or reject. Jung documented what he called moral death, a psychological state where guilt, remorse, and empathy don't just diminish, they disappear entirely. Watch them carefully. When they hurt someone, do they show any sign of internal conflict, any hesitation, any sleepless nights? According to Carl Jung's observations, normal humans carry the weight of their harmful actions. It shows in their body language, their sleep patterns, their moments of quiet reflection. But these individuals, nothing. They move from destruction to destruction like a shark moves through water smoothly, efficiently, without a trace of moral friction. Now, here's where Jung's research ventured into territory that most psychologists won't discuss. He believed that these individuals tap into what he called archetypal evil, a force that transcends individual psychology and connects to something darker and more ancient. Jung wrote, "The archetype of the shadow is the foundation of what we call evil in human nature," but he discovered that some people don't just connect with this archetype, they become conduits for it. You feel it when you're around them, don't you? That inexplicable sense of dread, that feeling like you're in the presence of something that shouldn't exist. Jung called this numinous terror, the recognition by your unconscious mind that you're facing something genuinely dangerous. Carl Jung discovered that human beings are fundamentally energetic creatures, and that healthy relationships involve what he called energetic reciprocity, a give and take that nourishes both parties. But malevolent narcissists operate on what Jung termed parasitic energetics. According to Jung's research, these individuals literally feed off negative emotional states. They don't just cause drama. They need drama like a plant needs sunlight. Every argument, every moment of confusion, every tear you shed actually energizes them. But here's what Jung found most disturbing about their energetic impact. It's contagious. Spend enough time around them, and you start to take on their patterns. You become suspicious, manipulative, emotionally unstable, not because you're bad, but because you're unconsciously absorbing their psychological toxins. Jung called this shadow contamination, the process by which prolonged exposure to archetypal evil begins to corrupt even good people. That's why Jung insisted that the only way to deal with such individuals is complete disconnection. Carl Jung, despite being a scientist, acknowledged what he called the spiritual dimension of psychological warfare. He observed that malevolent narcissists don't just reject morality, they actively seek to corrupt it in others. According to Jung's case studies, these individuals will systematically attack everything you hold sacred. Your faith, your values, your belief in goodness itself, all of it becomes a target. Why? Because Jung discovered that they can't tolerate the existence of anything pure or authentic. Jung documented how these individuals will spend months, even years, slowly eroding your moral foundation. They'll mock your principles, ridicule your beliefs, and gradually convince you that integrity is naive, that kindness is weakness, that truth is whatever benefits you most. This isn't random cruelty, it's strategic corruption. Jung realized that they're not just trying to control you, they're trying to remake you in their own image, because as long as goodness exists around them, it serves as a mirror reflecting their own moral emptiness. Carl Jung spent decades studying human transformation, and he identified what he called the point of no return, the moment when someone crosses from damaged but redeemable to something else entirely. According to Jung's research, this transformation happens when three psychological structures collapse simultaneously: the superego conscience, the ego ideal, aspiration toward goodness, and what he called the transcendent function, connection to something greater than oneself. Here's what Jung found most hopeless about this condition. Once this transformation occurs, it's irreversible. These individuals don't want to change because they don't believe they need to change. In their minds, they've simply evolved beyond the weakness of conscience and morality. Jung wrote, "Some people become so dark that light itself becomes their enemy." And that's exactly what you're dealing with when you encounter someone who has crossed this line. Your goodness doesn't inspire them to become better, it inspires them to destroy you. Carl Jung discovered that malevolent narcissists possess what he called intuitive psychology, an uncanny ability to read people's psychological vulnerabilities and exploit them with surgical precision. According to Jung's observations, they don't just manipulate randomly, they study you like a scientist studies a specimen, identifying your fears, your desires, your triggers, your weak points. Then they craft a psychological profile that allows them to control you like a puppet master controls a marionette. Jung found that their most devastating weapon isn't what they do, it's what they make you do to yourself. They create what Jung called psychological prisons where you become your own jailer. You start censoring yourself, doubting yourself, betraying your own values, all while thinking it was your choice. This is why Jung insisted that understanding their methods isn't enough. You need to understand the psychological mechanisms they exploit within you, or you'll fall victim to the next one who comes along. Carl Jung warned that these individuals don't exist in isolation. He believed they're manifestations of what he called the collective shadow, all the evil that humanity refuses to acknowledge concentrated into individual human forms. According to Jung's theory, when societies become too comfortable, too naive about human nature, these shadow carriers emerge to remind us that evil is real, that it walks among us, that good people who refuse to acknowledge this reality become its primary victims. Jung predicted that as traditional moral structures weakened, we would see an explosion of these shadow carriers. Look around you. Do you see evidence of his prediction coming true? Do you see more people who seem to operate without conscience, who manipulate without guilt, who destroy without remorse? If so, you're witnessing what Jung called the return of the shadow, a psychological and spiritual crisis that threatens the very fabric of human civilization. Carl Jung developed what he called shadow recognition protocols, specific ways to identify when you're in the presence of someone who has crossed the line into malevolent narcissism. According to Jung's method, you need to observe three things simultaneously: their emotional reactions, do they show genuine empathy, their relationship with truth, do they lie reflexively, and their energetic impact. Do you feel drained and confused after being with them? Jung created a simple test. After spending time with this person, ask yourself three questions. Do I feel more confident or less confident in my own perceptions? Do I feel energized or completely drained? Do I feel like a better person or a worse person? If your answers are less confident, completely drained, and worse person, you're dealing with what Jung called a shadow carrier, and your psychological survival depends on immediate action. Carl Jung discovered that traditional therapeutic approaches don't work with malevolent narcissists because they use therapy itself as another manipulation tool. Instead, Jung developed what he called protective disengagement, a systematic method for extracting yourself from their psychological web. According to Jung, Protocol, you don't try to fix them, convince them, or make them understand. You simply disappear from their reality as completely and permanently as possible. No explanations, no final conversations, no attempts at closure, just complete psychological withdrawal. Jung documented something remarkable. The moment you successfully disconnect from a shadow carrier, you experience what he called psychological resurrection. The confusion clears, the exhaustion lifts, and you remember who you really are. But here's the crucial part. Jung found that recovery requires not just physical distance, but what he called psychic purification, a deliberate process of rebuilding your connection to truth, goodness, and your own authentic self. Carl Jung spent his final years warning about what he saw as humanity's greatest threat. Not war, not disease, not even death, but the gradual normalization of evil, the slow process by which societies learn to tolerate, excuse, and eventually embrace the very darkness that destroys them. According to Jung's final writings, malevolent narcissists are like psychological cancer cells. They start small, they disguise themselves as healthy tissue, but their ultimate purpose is the destruction of the entire organism. Jung believed that every person reaches what he called choice points, moments when they must decide whether to stand for truth or surrender to convenient lies, whether to maintain their integrity or compromise it for temporary gain. He discovered that malevolent narcissists are expert at identifying these choice points in others and applying maximum pressure at exactly the right moment to ensure you make the wrong choice. Carl Jung's final message was this: evil doesn't triumph because it's stronger than good. It triumphs because good people refuse to acknowledge its existence, refuse to study its methods, and refuse to take the difficult actions necessary to stop it. According to Jung, every time you ignore red flags, every time you make excuses for inexcusable behavior, every time you choose fault, peace over necessary confrontation, you're not just enabling one individual narcissist. You're weakening the collective psychological immune system that protects all of humanity. But Jung also discovered something hopeful. Surviving an encounter with malevolent narcissism can transform you into what he called a wounded healer, someone who has faced the shadow and lived to warn others. That's why you're watching this video. That's why Jung's words resonate so deeply. You've seen the darkness, you felt its impact, and now you have a choice. Will you use this knowledge to protect yourself and others, or will you pretend it doesn't exist and become its next victim? Carl Jung issued a warning that reverberates with increasing urgency in our contemporary world. The world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. This wasn't merely poetic metaphor. It was a stark recognition that the fate of human civilization rests not on our technological prowess or economic systems, but on our collective psychological maturity and our willingness to confront the darkness within ourselves and our societies. Jung understood that beneath the veneer of civilization lies a fundamental psychological reality. We are only as strong as our weakest psychological link. The thread that holds our world together is woven from millions of individual psyches, each carrying both light and shadow, each capable of either contributing to collective wisdom or falling prey to the very forces that have historically torn civilizations apart. He believed that the future of human civilization depends entirely on our ability to recognize evil, not as some abstract theological concept, but as a psychological reality that manifests through specific patterns of behavior and manipulation. More critically, we must understand evil's methods, how it operates, how it spreads, how it corrupts, and how it turns good people into unwitting accomplices. Only through this understanding can we develop what Jung saw as essential, a psychological immunity to malevolent influence. Central to Jung's analysis was his recognition of what we now understand as malevolent narcissism. Individuals who combine grandiose self-regard with a complete absence of empathy and a sophisticated ability to manipulate others. These shadow carriers, as Jung might have called them, represent one of the greatest threats to psychological and social health because they operate by exploiting the very qualities that make civilization possible. trust, cooperation, and our fundamental assumption that others share our basic moral framework. Jung observed that malevolent narcissists are psychological parasites who thrive by creating confusion, sowing division, and gradually eroding the social trust that binds communities together. They are masters of projection, blame-shifting, and gaslighting techniques that leave their victims questioning their own perceptions and moral compass. What makes them particularly dangerous is their ability to present themselves as victims, leaders, or saviors, while systematically destroying the very foundations of healthy relationships and institutions. According to Jung's framework, when you learn to identify malevolent narcissists, you're not merely protecting yourself from personal harm. Though that protection is certainly valuable, you're participating in something far more significant: the psychological evolution of our entire species. You're contributing to the collective development of what Jung called psychological immunity, the ability of human communities to recognize and resist psychological manipulation and abuse. Jung's vision extended far beyond individual therapy or personal growth. He saw the recognition and resistance of malevolent narcissism as an evolutionary imperative. Just as our physical immune system evolved to protect us from biological threats, Jung believed we must develop psychological immune systems capable of protecting us from psychological threats. This isn't just personal development, it's species development. The stakes, as Jung saw them, couldn't be higher. History is littered with examples of civilizations that fell not to external armies, but to internal psychological corruption. Societies that lost the ability to distinguish truth from lies, virtue from vice, genuine leadership from manipulation. Jung recognized that we are always one generation away from losing these crucial distinctions, and that each generation must actively choose to develop and maintain its psychological immunity. In what many consider his most pregnant observation, Jung made a final prediction about the future of human development: the people who learn to recognize and resist malevolent narcissism will become the psychological leaders of the next phase of human evolution. These individuals will be the ones who rebuild trust in communities where it has been shattered, restore truth in environments polluted by lies and manipulation, and create the foundational structures for what Jung envisioned as a more conscious civilization. These future leaders won't necessarily be political figures or celebrities. They will be teachers, parents, friends, colleagues, and community members who have done the difficult work of confronting their own shadows and developing the psychological sophistication necessary to recognize manipulation and abuse. They will be the ones who can create safe spaces for healing, model healthy relationships, and gradually restore faith in human goodness and cooperation. But Jung was never naive about the difficulty of this path. He issued his ultimate warning with full awareness of what he was asking. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. Confronting the shadow, both our personal shadow and the collective shadow, requires us to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our world. It means recognizing that we are all capable of being deceived, manipulated, and even corrupted. It means accepting that sometimes good people do bad things, that institutions we trust can become vehicles for abuse, and that our own blind spots and psychological wounds can make us vulnerable to malevolent influence. This moral effort, Jung described, is not a one-time achievement, but a lifelong commitment to psychological honesty and growth. It requires the courage to question our assumptions, examine our motivations, and remain vigilant against the subtle ways that evil can masquerade as good. It demands that we develop what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, the ability to see both light and dark, good and evil, truth and deception without falling into simplistic thinking or cynical despair. Yet Alongside his warnings, Jung offered a profound promise. Your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. This isn't merely inspirational rhetoric. It's a practical instruction for psychological development and social healing. Jung understood that true clarity comes not from external validation or social conformity, but from the courageous journey inward. When we honestly examine our own hearts, our fears, desires, wounds, and shadows, we develop the psychological sophistication necessary to see clearly in the external world. We become less susceptible to manipulation because we understand our own vulnerabilities. We become better judges of character because we've honestly assessed our own character. This inward journey, Jung believed, is ultimately what enables us to contribute to collective healing and evolution. Only those who have done their own shadow work can reliably recognize and resist the shadow when it appears in others. Only those who have learned to hold their own psychological contradictions with compassion can help others navigate theirs. Today, Jung's insights feel more relevant than ever. We live in an era of unprecedented psychological manipulation where sophisticated techniques of influence and control are deployed through mass media, social networks, and political systems. The shadow carriers Jung warned about have access to tools of manipulation that previous generations could never have imagined. The question Jung posed remains as urgent today as when he first articulated it. Will you be one of those who awakens? Will you do the difficult work of developing psychological immunity and consciousness? Will you contribute to the evolution of human psychological sophistication? Or will you remain vulnerable to the very forces that threaten to tear apart the fabric of civilization? The shadow carriers are indeed counting on us to remain asleep, to stay distracted, divided, and psychologically naive. They thrive in environments where people lack the psychological tools to recognize manipulation, where communities have lost the ability to distinguish between genuine and false leadership, where individuals are so disconnected from their own inner wisdom that they become easy targets for exploitation. But Jung is counting on something else entirely, our capacity for awakening. He believed in our ability to evolve psychologically, to develop the consciousness necessary to recognize and resist evil, and to create the foundations for a more mature and healthy civilization. The choice, as Jung emphasized, is ultimately ours. Every day, in countless small interactions and decisions, we choose either to develop our psychological consciousness or to remain asleep. We choose either to contribute to collective healing and wisdom or to perpetuate the patterns that keep us vulnerable to manipulation and abuse. The world does indeed hang on a thin thread, the thread of human psychological development. The question is whether we will strengthen that thread through our own growth and consciousness or allow it to snap through our continued unconsciousness and naivety. Jung's legacy is not just his theoretical insights, but his challenge to each of us. To become the psychological leaders our world desperately needs to awaken from the dreams that keep us vulnerable and to participate consciously in the next phase of human development. What will you choose? Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it. And if you'd like to go a step further in supporting this work, you can now leave a super thanks below. It's a small way to say thank you, and it truly helps keep this channel going.